Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing another recent reads wrap up, and if you didn't see my last video about where I've been, why I haven't been posting as often, I'll make sure to link that down below if you want to see a life update. And as you may know from my previous video, I'm doing very minimal editing in my videos now, so I'm gonna try to see how this goes. Let's go ahead and get started. I have 6 books to talk about, one of them being a DNF, and the first book I have to talk about is going to go down as, of course, one of my favorites of the year, but also just a favorite of all time, I would say, and that is Jade Legacy by Fonda. I had seen mixed reviews around the conclusion of the Greenbone saga, and I was so nervous because I really liked Jade City. I gave it 4 stars. There were some things that I didn't love about it, but I liked like the cool mafia style politicking. The world felt very well realized. The characters were really interesting, but I didn't feel like overly invested in any of them. And then that all changed with Jade War. By the end of Jade War, I was completely hooked. I loved these characters. I kept thinking about the story all the time, and I knew I wanted to go straight into Jade Legacy after reading Jade War, especially with the conclusion of Jade War. If you remember, you've read it, and you know what happens. I really just needed to dive right back in. And Jade Legacy, I'd heard that there were a lot of time jumps, and that was where I'd seen a splitting of opinions. Some people loving the time jumps and others not so much. So I was very nervous, and I tried to temper my expectations, but I should have trusted Fonda because this blew me away. And I was not at all bothered by the time jumps. I completely understand why people would be. This story, you really get so much more of the world and outside of kind of the island nation that we'd been following so closely. You get to really see how the Jade War kind of affects the entirety of the world and the surrounding nations so much more. And the politicking and what happens with some of the characters and their arcs and just how everything wrapped up at the end, I adored it. I adored it. Even having the time jumps, I was so nervous that I would not feel as invested in some of the other characters that maybe we hadn't focused as much on in the earlier books. But Fonda is just a magician because she made me care about them so much, even by just focusing on them for a couple pages, a couple chapters. I felt so invested in every single one of these characters and cared so much about what was going to happen. And I just think that the politics of it, the way everything kind of came together at the end, and the outmaneuverings, it's just so sophisticated in a way I've really never read before. I had just never read something quite on this level of maneuvering and political moves and just backstabbing, betrayals, triumphs. It was just so awesome, and it was so unlike anything else I'd ever read. This trilogy is definitely going to go down as one of my favorites, definitely in my top 10. I loved it. I'm so relieved that I'm one of the people who absolutely loved the trilogy and loved the conclusion. Again, I would understand why other people may not feel as invested in Jade Legacy. I can understand why the time jumps wouldn't work for some people, but luckily they totally worked for me. I loved them. I love Fonda. I love this world. I definitely am going to read whatever else Fonda writes. I really want to read the novella that's set as a prequel to the series because I'm just obsessed. And I think that this is so much a book that, and a series that deserves all the hype that it gets. It would be such a cool TV show. I'm so surprised that that adaptation. I know that there was an adaptation that was like rumored, and I'm so surprised it fell through because this would make such a good TV show. Oh, I want to see it so bad. But it was so good. I highly recommend this one. It's a little bit slower. It's a little bit more character focused, but if you like Godfather and just want to see a fantasy version of it, this is the series for you. It is so top tier. And then I wanted a little bit of a break from epic fantasy. I was on a fantasy hangover, I'll say, because I was just so obsessed with Greenbone. I wanted to like let that sit for a second. So I read Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood next. This one was fun. I really loved The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, which was her first release. Was that her first release? It was the really popular one from a couple years ago, and I loved that one. This one I still enjoyed, but just not quite as much. And now I'm like trying to recall why I didn't love it as much. I think it was just, what in the world was it? I don't even, that's not a good sign that I don't even remember. I really like Ali Hazelwood's character work. I really like how she weaves in kind of these STEM environments. I think that that's really cool, making her characters like scientists and researchers, and just it's very cool how she does that. I'm always kind of fascinated with that part of her stories. And the romance in this one was very cute, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't something that blew me away. And I'm totally spacing on exactly why, which is kind of sad. So that's not a great sign, but alas, I gave it 4 stars, not 5, because I had a really good time with it while I was reading it, but it wasn't something that I was going to like shout from the rooftops about like The Love Hypothesis was. So yeah, kind of sad that I can't even remember much about that book at all. After Love on the Brain, I read Tyranny of Faith by Richard Swan because I had read Justice of Kings early last year, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't a favorite, but I really liked so much about that book, how this character of Von Vault, he is kind of this judge, jury, and executioner all in one. He travels across this kind of empire to kind of meet and judge some of these like local disputes, or sometimes larger kind of like murder mysteries. He's kind of like a detective, but also kind of the judge all in one. And so I thought that stuff was really cool. I really liked the main kind of perspective that the story was being told from, which is his apprentice. And the first book, it kind of had these slight glimmers of horror. The magic system revolved a lot around like necromancy. There was some of that kind of teased in the first book, but not a whole lot. And the second book really expanded a lot on the magic, and the big bad continues to be bigger and badder in this sequel. There were parts that I found kind of tedious to get through, and I am surprised because I like this series best when it's focusing on more of the detective kind of murder mystery aspect of it. Like there was a murder mystery that we're trying to solve in this second book, and I was much more interested in that plot line than I was in some of the kind of afterlife necromancy horror type magic scenes. That when the story focused on that, I wasn't as interested, which was weird because I was expecting to be way more interested in that part of the book because I really like horror books, so I thought that I would love that kind of like horror magic. And there was just something about it that I just didn't love as much when it focused on that, and there was quite a bit of focus on that. Some of the scenes were quite gruesome and disturbing, but nothing like super scary where I would recommend against reading it if you're not a horror fan. I don't think it's that level of horror where it would like terrify you if you don't typically read horror, but it got pretty creepy in some parts. But yeah, so I overall liked this sequel. I think I liked it just as much as I liked the first book. I wouldn't say I liked it more, but I was surprised at how when the story focused on certain things, I just kind of lost a little bit of interest. So I kind of debated whether or not I wanted to pick up the third book, because I'd heard that the third book really leaned into that horror magic and like afterlife kind of like purgatory almost. And I finally decided to pick up the third book because I saw a couple people have just raved reviews of it. And I think I should have just gone with my gut, because I started the third book and I got about 150 pages in, and I was really just not interested at all into what was happening. I found that the series where it starts is very, very, very different than where it ends up in the third book. It's much kind of smaller scope, much more like grounded in reality, a lot less focus on magic in the first book. And I liked the series most when it was doing that. And it got into so much of the magic and weird stuff that it kind of just, that focus and that being the direction it went, it kind of lost me. So I ended up DNFing it because I just didn't love the direction that the series was going in. That's not to say that it was bad. It just wasn't where I personally found the most interest when I was reading this trilogy. So this, unfortunately, was not, it ended up not being a trilogy for me, but I do still really like that first book, and some of the parts of the second book I really, really enjoyed. So I definitely am interested in reading what this author is going to do next, but I was just a little bit bummed that the magic horror stuff kind of lost me. So yeah, I would say give it a try though, if that sounds really interesting to you, because it was written well, and I was very impressed with like the character work, and the writing style itself was very, very good. It just, yeah, for some reason lost my interest. And then I also read Britt-Marie Was Here by Fredrick Backman. I love Backman, and I like to toss in a different type of book, any other genre, in between some of my fantasy series that I'm reading. And this one had been on my shelf forever. I had bought it, I think 3-4 years ago at this point, and it had just been sitting there. So I finally picked it up, and I'm so glad I did, because it was absolutely adorable. I really, really enjoyed this one. It is a story about Britt-Marie, who is in her 60s, and she ends up getting, it's not a divorce, but she ends up being separated from her husband, who she's been with for decades, and is kind of lost, just doesn't know what to do from here. And so she finds a job as a kind of janitor at this small town's recreation center, and ends up just falling in love with this town, and everyone around in this town falls in love with her. And it's just the sweetest story of how it's never too late to start new, to have fulfillment, and find it in the most unlikely of places. And again, Backman always has just top tier character work. This book was no exception. I just adored Britt-Marie and the rest of the supporting cast around her so much. I just thought it was precious. It wasn't my favorite Backman. It was a little bit, at times it was a little dull, but overall it was such a sweet story and a sweet message. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and it's one that I would recommend if you're a big Backman fan. If you don't love Backman's books in general, this is probably not one I would recommend to you, and it's not where I would recommend starting with Fredrick Backman. Anxious People and Beartown are my 2 favorites by him, but this one was adorable, and I'm continuing to go through the rest of his books and his backlist, because I just think that his character work is outstanding. So the last one that I have to talk about today is Sunreach by Brandon Sanderson, because I am finally catching up on the Skyward series, and I have a very interesting relationship with the Skyward series, because I loved Skyward. 5 stars. Oh my gosh, was obsessed, loved it. Read Starsight, liked it. It was good. It was very good. I gave it 4 stars. Cytonic, I could not stand. Cytonic. I actively disliked that book. And that is very rare for me to like actively very much dislike something, especially a Sanderson book, and just was shocked at some of the reveals in that book, the tone of that book, just did not like it. But I loved the beginning of this series so much, and I'd heard that the novellas were very good. So I was like, you know what? Fine. I do want to finish out the series. It had so much about it that I loved from the first book. So I started reading the novellas. I finished the first one, Sunreach, and absolutely loved it. It like went back to what felt like all the things that I originally loved about Skyward were in this book. If you like the little Taenixes, the little slugs in the books, you'll love Sunreach. I loved the experiments and such that were going on in this book. That was so fun to follow, and I loved that the characters we were following were some characters that we really hadn't gotten their perspectives or a ton about them, and it was really fun to learn more about them. So I loved this one. It was short, it was sweet, and I thought it did exactly what I wanted it to do, which was get me excited again about the series. So I gave it 5 stars. I mean, it was like, what more can I ask for? You got me back into the Skyward series. So now I'm reading Redawn, and I'm gonna finish the rest of those novellas and then read Defiant. And you know, I'm not expecting like best thing ever it to be totally redeemed by the end, but I'm seeing glimmers of what I loved so much about Skyward, which is definitely enough to push me forward through to the end of this series. So that is my most recent reads wrap up. I would love to hear, what have you read recently that you loved, that you didn't love as much? Let me know in the comments down below, and thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!